I wanted to do more of a deep dive on Derek Carr as a whole. Can he really take these Saints to the next level, right? The goal is always a Super Bowl, but at least playoffs, you feel like can be on the table, especially in a weak division with Derek Carr. And I kind of want to talk about where Derek Carr is at right now and how that relates to the Saints. Because I made a film study just talking about Derek Carr in general before he went to the Saints. But now that we know he's there, let's do kind of a deep dive into some statistics and just some things I find interesting and talk about, maybe where Derek Carr's career could end up and how it could finish off here in New Orleans. So yeah, let's just jump into it. So first things first, let's look at his PFF grades. So PFF grades year in and year out, and you certainly see that last year was a disappointment according to PFF. If you're a fan of this stuff, you wouldn't be totally encouraged by his 2022 grade with a 66.6. This is the worst grade he has posted since his rookie season, so that's definitely something that's a bit concerning. But again, you look at his overall career, and he has been a bit up and down in the past. I mean, he had a 68.9 grade in 2017, but he has had multiple 80-plus grades and, a good chunk of sort of 75-plus grades, which is kind of where his career, for the most part, has floated around. As for more of a traditional box score stat, look where, you see on the screen here, if you're a fan of this kind of stuff, which again, I think is fine to look at. Obviously there's context, you have to take it in, but still, it's fine to look at. You see that this was, again, the worst passer rating season of his career, except for his rookie season. Barely, though. I mean, this was an 86.3. That 27 season, he had an 86.4. So, okay, technically worse here, but not by a ton. But, you definitely see the passing yards were way down. Again, second lowest this time passing yards season before, not counting his rookie year, because rookie year wasn't great. We get that. But since 2015, that's kind of how you view it. But again, as a whole, he's been someone who has had a bit of up and downs over his career. The 91.8 passer rating is fine. It's solid, and he's certainly had seasons around that. But I think his average season has been a little better than that, and has even had back-to-back seasons of a passer rating over 100, which was in 2019 and in 2020. And one of the things I talked about, when I made my film study on him, was I thought this 2022 year wasn't necessarily him taking a step back all season. I thought he had a couple more bad games than he typically does in a year. Usually in a typical year, he'll have one or two bad games, as do most quarterbacks. I feel like this year he had just a couple more, which kind of hurt his stats, which is maybe a good thing, because his average game, I would say, was still on par with his typical average game. But all this stuff kind of got me thinking of Derek Carr, someone who has some solid stats, but nothing outstanding, but still good. Could he become a Super Bowl winner on a different team, for example? Well, has it happened before, right? Let's use history to help predict the future. Has there ever been a situation where something like that has happened? And yes, in fact, there's been one very recently where this has happened. It was the Matthew Stafford situation. If you look at Stafford's career numbers and Carr's career numbers, they are shockingly similar. I mean, we're talking within or nearly within a point in both of the two main categories statistically that we're talking about here, passer rating and PFF grades. His passer rating was, 0.9 points lower than Carr's was. So Carr actually had a better passer rating career-wise. PFF grade just a little bit lower at 1.1 lower. So definitely there is some history here. And the other bright spot is it's not like the Saints gave up 2 first-round picks for Carr the way that the Rams did for Stafford. And I think some people might argue, well, Stafford has a history of kind of coming up clutch in the big moments. I would argue so does Carr. Carr has plenty of big fourth quarter comebacks as well. I don't see them as dissimilar players. Again, Carr does not have the incredible postseason run that Stafford has. So Stafford obviously has the leg up, as we look at them now. But prior to the trade, I do not see them as totally dissimilar players. However, the last year, what you see on the screen now, this is the last year each of them played with their original teams. So the last year, Stafford played with the Lions, and the last year, Carr played with the Raiders. And while my memory was Stafford didn't have the best year his final year, I think there was some underlying statistics that actually would go to show that his stats weren't quite as good as maybe you'd expect them to be. They were still pretty solid, and I would say good in his last year with the Lions. A 96.3 passer rating and an 82 PFF grade is good, whereas as we talked about, Carr is coming off of one of his worst seasons, an 86.3 passer rating and a 66.6 PFF grade. So while the Stafford to Carr comparison, I think in some ways works, in other ways does not. So what does this all mean? Well, maybe nothing, but, again, going with the Stafford to Carr comparison, can Carr be the next Matt Stafford? I wouldn't bet on it for several reasons. I think for one thing, I would say that, yes, prior to the Matthew Stafford trade, they had done a lot of similar stuff. I think that Stafford went to a much better situation, at least for that first year, than Carr is going to now with the Saints. Not to say that I think the Saints are a bad situation to go to. I actually think they're a pretty solid situation, and I think they were a better team than their record would indicate last year. I really do. They still have key pieces on defense, but, losing Sean Payton, I do think has hurt that franchise, and I do, I just don't think it's quite the Matthew Stafford situation, right? Matthew Stafford had Cooper Kupp, which for sure Stafford was kind of able to unlock the greatness in Cooper Kupp, but he was still very good before Stafford got there. Obviously, Stafford inherits, one of the best defenses in football that year on top of it. So again, if you're going to win a Super Bowl, you have a good team, right? And they were able to do that. The Saints have a good team, but I don't know if they have as good of a team as that Rams team was with, Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey, and Cooper Kupp on that roster. I don't know if the Saints quite have a three-headed monster like that, because I don't know if any team has a three-headed monster quite like that, including the Rams now, because they don't have Ramsey. But, that's obviously a big factor, although the flip side is you don't have to give up 2 first-round picks for him. So, there's that. But the other thing is, again, compare the Stafford thing. What Stafford did was he had 4 great games in the playoffs, I thought, well, you can point to certain aspects and say, okay, that dropped interception in the 49ers game, sure, that was an error. Definitely. But I would argue that, he still did some really nice things in the fourth quarter of that game, and really in the fourth quarter of every game. Again, the Cardinals game was just a wire-to-wire blowout, essentially. The Buccaneers game, which I saw with my own 2 eyes, very disappointed in the stands, he was incredible in that game, and he was the better quarterback in that game. He outdueled Brady in that football game, and he was a huge reason that they were able to pull off that victory, after the Buccaneers tied it, being able to drive down, get the Cooper Kupp pass, and be able to get the game-winning field goal. Stafford was incredible with that stuff, and obviously in the Super Bowl, they were down with 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter. He threw a no-look pass to get them to victory. Obviously, Stafford was incredible, but we're not talking about Stafford. We're talking about Carr, and is Carr capable of doing that? It's possible. The average Carr performance, if you look at the average 4 games, he does not play that well. But you could say the same thing about Stafford, and that's why I'm making the comparison, because I don't think it's crazy to think that if you're the Saints, you feel like you have Carr, you have probably, you have easily the best quarterback in the division now. You probably are the front runners to win the division. And if you do, can Carr become Matt Stafford like in the playoffs? And can he perform well and have 4 straight games, string 4 straight games together and get a Super Bowl win? Sure, it's totally possible. And while I'm not sure if I would bet on it, just because I don't know if I'd bet on anyone outside of a few quarterbacks to be able to do that, there's a chance, and that chance is, I think, worth taking. So that's kind of why I don't really have an issue with this signing, just because, well, yes, in an ideal world, it'd be great to have a Derek Carr type quarterback that you're not paying very much money, like kind of what happened with Stafford. He wasn't getting paid a ton his first year with the Rams, only about $20 million. That would be ideal. That's not on the table. That's not an option. There is no version of that this year. So obviously, it'd be great to have an elite quarterback. And, Lamar Jackson's the only option there, and some people would even argue he's not elite. So if you're not going to get that, what else do you do? Well, you go after someone like this. I totally see the logic behind it. So, yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on Stafford, and if he could be the next, my thoughts on Carr, and if he could be the next Stafford. Just an interesting discussion on how those two careers are very similar prior to each of them leaving their teams. Just an interesting situation. But yeah, that's what I think. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.